Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 9 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is continuing its study of a greenhouse gas emissions cap for the oil and gas sector. Today is our 5th of 8 meetings with witnesses for this study. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room or remotely using the Zoom application. Please note that the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entire committee. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted now that we are in session. Today's proceedings will be televised and also made available via the House of Commons website. I think all of us have been here enough times to know the health and safety information, so basically we ask people to keep their face masks on if not speaking. For the members and anyone else who's here, please remain masked up. And then for our witnesses, because you're new here, I'll go through a bit of information for each of you. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few quick rules to follow. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of your choice. And because of the translation services, we don't want to speak too quickly. Just go at a normal pace. Allow for the occasional pause in your statements so that the interpreters can keep up. And that way we make sure that all of our members and those watching can participate fairly in their official language of choice. For members of the room, raise your hand, and I'll try to work with the clerk to decide both within the room and who is on screen, who speaking order. If you're on Zoom, please use the raise hand function, and you'll be placed in order. We'll do our best to make sure that we are as fair in recognizing the speakers as we can be. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're on Zoom, please click on the microphone to unmute yourself, and for members in the room, our team here will look after you. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And a reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Now, for today, on our study of greenhouse gas emissions cap for the oil and gas sector, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We have appearing as individuals, David Keith, Professor of Public Policy, Harvard Kennedy School, Andrew Leach, Associate Professor, University of Alberta, and Jennifer Winter, Associate Professor, University of Calgary. From Environmental Defence Canada, we have Julia Levin, Senior Climate and Energy Program Manager, Dale Marshall, Manager, National Climate Program. From TC Energy Corporation, we have Robert Tarvidas, Vice President, Regulatory Strategy, and Christopher Vivoni, Director, Federal Government Relations. From Trottier Energy Institute, we have Simon Langlois-Bertrand, Research Associate. Each of the panels or the groups will be given 5 minutes for an opening statement. I have a handy timekeeping system, so when you have 30 seconds left, I'll show you the yellow card. When your time is up, I'll give the red card. Don't stop mid-sentence, but wind up within a sentence or two. And that applies when we're going through the rounds of questions as well, just so that each of the members has their chance to interact with our esteemed panelists who are with us here today. So with that, I will get my clock ready. We're going to go through the 3 individuals first for 5-minute opening statements. And we will start with Mr. Keith. I will turn it over to you, and you will have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. First, some sound reasons to oppose a cap. Every ton of carbon is equally bad for the climate. So why pick on the oil and gas industry emissions for a hard cap? The entire point of Canada's impressive carbon pricing scheme is to let the market find the cheapest and best ways to save tons rather than having the market be in the business of micromanaging individual sectors. We don't have a cap on internet or air travel, so why oil and gas? Yet, I am in favor of a hard cap. My rationale rests on concerns about Alberta's and Canada's economic future in a carbon-constrained world. The climate is getting a much higher level of political attention at the top levels of major governments in a way that's really different from any time in the whole 30 years that I've focused my career on climate change. The world will not cut emissions as fast as environmentalists like me want, but they will be cut. Oil demand will peak and it will decline. And the technology for accessing tight oil fracking will spread, putting a long-term restraint on prices and making Canada's oil, with its comparatively high upstream emissions, relatively less competitive. Even with war today, sadly, oil is 25% below its inflation-adjusted price peak, and futures point low, suggesting the market sees this as a blip. I moved to Alberta from Pittsburgh. I've seen what a crash looks like. I've seen what it does to people. As an Albertan, one who wants to see good jobs for my children and my friends, including many friends in the oil patch, my judgment is that digging the economy deeper into oil and gas will just make the crash harder. It's easy money now that we buy at the price of our children's economic future and of the planet's climate future. My hope is that government sends a clear message that drives private ingenuity and investment away from oil and gas and towards new businesses that can harness Alberta and Canada's brain power, its engineering strength, its engineering services sector to develop new value-added businesses that can thrive in a world as oil and gas declines under a carbon constraint. Some hope that a cap will drive investment in cutting emissions in upstream oil and gas. Indeed, in some sense, that's its sort of formal purpose. It may. But despite serving years ago on the 5-person federal panel that recommended some of the key carbon capture and storage investments in Alberta, I hope that little effort is put into reducing upstream emissions. Doing so will just sink more money into cutting those emissions, and that can't in the long run secure Alberta's or Canada's economic future. And it may divert money from other investments, so increasing our dependence on oil and gas. After all, eliminating upstream emissions can only eliminate about 1/5 of the overall emissions from the life cycle of oil and gas use. Most emissions come when the product is burned. The problem is the product, not the process of making it. That is the essential reason why Alberta and Canada must look beyond the oil and gas sector. If we want a stable climate, we can't keep putting CO2 in the atmosphere. We can argue about how quickly the transition needs to be. There are legitimately different views, but we will have to stop. I urge you to move towards a stringent cap on upstream oil and gas emissions, both to protect the climate and because it is in the long run interest of Albertans and other Canadians whose economies are tied to oil and gas. Of course, people with short run interests in the current system, the fossil fuel party, will argue the contrary. But theirs are not the only legitimate voices in Alberta. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for your opening comments. Just under the clock, and we appreciate it. That gives us lots of time for the next opening statements. So, Mr. Leach, we will turn to you for your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Merci de m'avoir invité ici aujourd'hui. C'est un plaisir de.
Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you on this very important subject.
Undoubtedly require more stringent policies to meet its commitments, its international and its domestic commitments to reduce emissions. And I strongly support and have worked on the implementation of these policies. But with that in mind, I'm not convinced that a regulatory cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector is needed. L'établissement d'un plafond décroissant dans
setting a decreasing cap in the sector could lead to technological, constitutional, financial challenges and lead to less cost-effective emissions reductions.
The sector is Canada's largest emitting sector. Oil and gas production accounted for 191 megatons in our last inventory year of 2019, which is just slightly more than the 186 megatons we've measured for transportation. And forecasts, importantly, show that these emissions are unlikely to decrease meaningfully unless more stringent policies are imposed. So there should be no question that oil and gas production contributes substantially to Canada's emissions. And as Professor Keith said eloquently, that the emissions embodied in Canadian hydrocarbon production are a significant source of global emissions. And absent significant decreases in emissions from the oil and gas sector, Canada's goals will become increasingly challenging and eventually, for all intents and purposes, impossible to meet. A lot of times we'll hear people, when you say something like that, people will respond and say, well, the emissions intensity has been improving. And I'd like to point out that that's not consistently true. The average Canadian barrel of oil has become more emissions intensive over the past 3 decades. And the reason for that is simple. More of our barrels are coming from the more emissions intensive oil sands, and more of those oil sands barrels are produced using more emissions intensive in situ processes. So within individual sectors, the stories have been good, but overall, there's not as much to sing about as some might have you believe. The story's slightly better for natural gas, but again, there we only see a slight long-term decrease in emissions intensity. So what's driving the story? You know, we know that the biggest driver for production and thus for emissions in the oil and gas sector are factors beyond our own borders, commodity prices, and commodity prices influenced by everything from technology to global development to the war that we're all talking about these last few days. And high prices will generally mean more willingness to invest to maintain production in spite of carbon policy changes. But that type of analysis begs the question of whether oil prices, combined with carbon pricing and with a regulatory cap on emissions, are going to lead to, again, as Professor Keith said, sufficient investment to decouple emissions from production. My belief, like his, is that this is unlikely to happen, perhaps for a slightly different reason. Echoing some recent statements from industry leaders, there's just not enough long-term certainty on the policy side. And there are some measures that can close this gap, tax credits, et cetera, but a regulatory cap doesn't get you further towards that goal. The next thing I'd point out is that in arguing for the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act before the Supreme Court, the Attorney General argued strongly that economists support carbon pricing because it's the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions. They cited my own testimony before the Finance Committee of this House to support this claim. So I kind of have to stick with that. But carbon pricing's cost effectiveness, it comes from applying the same price to a whole set of emissions, to as many emissions as you can. En gardant ça à l'esprit,
Now, with that in mind, 2 questions come up. First, would we want more stringent policies applied on some sectors than on others? And second question, even if we did, do we need another mechanism or another policy in order to do that? My answer to both of these questions is no.
We do not need more stringent policies on one sector than others, and we do not need new policies, even if that's what we choose to do. Carbon pricing gives us all the tools we need. That emissions in one sector are more resilient to carbon pricing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm 2 paragraphs away. That emissions in one sector are more resilient to carbon pricing is indicative that there's more value there per ton of carbon emitted, which is what carbon pricing drives our economy towards. And the judgments about whether that value is going to be present in the long term are generally not best made by governments. But if government chooses to do so, Parliament has the means to ensure that carbon prices are reflected across the investment, production, export, and combustion decisions related to hydrocarbons. The carbon pricing regulation is there, the clean fuel regulations, the C69 measures, and the tax code are all there. So in conclusion, if this proposed oil and gas cap is just an expression of what we expect policies to bring, so be it. But I question the need for and the efficacy of a new regulatory mechanism. Thank you, and sorry for being 10 seconds over.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Leach. All good. Lots to think about there. Now, Ms. Winter, we'll go to you. So over to you for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to appear before the committee on this very important issue. It is a privilege to speak to you today. I'm an economist, and my research expertise is energy and environmental policy. I focus on climate change policy, and in particular, emissions reduction policies and their effects on households and emissions-intensive and trade-exposed industries. I draw on this expertise in speaking to you today. Canada faces a challenge in reducing emissions and simultaneously protecting the quality of life and economic growth that we enjoy. I strongly support implementing increasingly stringent policies to meet Canada's commitments under the Paris Agreement. At the same time, adaptation to and mitigation of climate change is a complex problem, and the various policy solutions should be weighed very carefully. My comments today reflect both my support for emissions reductions and my desire to see thoughtful climate policy design that maximizes benefits and minimizes costs to Canadians. From a global perspective, as well as for Canada's Paris commitments, the source of emissions does not matter. A ton is a ton is a ton, regardless of whether the emissions come from Nova Scotia or Alberta, from home heating or oil and gas production. And yet, as numerous witnesses to this committee have noted, the oil and gas sector is a significant contributor to Canada's emissions. The sector's emissions must decline in order for Canada to meet its 2030 and 2050 emissions reduction targets. This is the case for all parts of the Canadian economy, including households. The important question facing this committee and the government is whether a cap on oil and gas emissions is necessary to achieve the desired emissions reductions. Specifically, what policy problem does the cap solve? I respectfully submit that the government already has the necessary policy tools at its disposal and that a cap on oil and gas emissions would unnecessarily damage the Canadian economy. My concern is fourfold. First, a sector-specific emissions cap overlaps with existing policy. Emissions pricing, whether the federal backstop or provincial or territorial systems, creates incentives for emissions reductions in both the demand and supply sides of the economy. On the demand side, the emissions price increases the cost of fossil fuel-based energy sources like gasoline and emissions-intensive goods and services. The emissions price lowers demand for these products by incenting changes in consumption patterns. On the supply side, emissions pricing increases the costs of production, incenting changes in production processes to avoid the price. Moreover, the proposed clean fuel standard creates a market for emissions reduction credits, further incentivizing emissions reductions across the Canadian economy. This market ensures firms receive a return for investments in emissions reductions beyond avoiding paying the emissions price. Given these two policies already in place, a cap on oil and gas emissions adds little to Canada's toolkit and is potentially more costly than beneficial, which leads me to my next concern. Differential treatment of a specific sector reallocates capital and labor throughout the economy, moving these production inputs away from their most productive use. This artificially expands some sectors and shrinks others and lowers Canada's productivity. Third, and relatedly, differential emissions prices, either implicit or explicit in different sectors, means some firms engage in more costly emissions reductions than would otherwise be the case. This results in more costly emissions reductions overall, increasing the cost of meeting Canada's targets. Fourth, an emissions cap for the oil and gas sector adds complexity in an already complex climate space. Canada already has differential prices via different provincial, territorial, and federal systems, and adding an additional regulatory cap exacerbates this complexity. A cap on emissions would be administratively costly for the government and adds to the compliance burden for firms, increasing their costs. It needlessly complicates the Canadian climate policy landscape. Moreover, it moves us away from a consistent approach to emissions pricing across Canada. Given these concerns, a direct approach is a more appropriate, easier, and less costly way to reduce oil and gas emissions. This could include reducing output, increasing the stringency of the emissions price, or reducing the output subsidy that emissions-intensive and trade-exposed sectors receive. To conclude, I have three main points. First, there is nothing special about oil and gas emissions. A ton is a ton is a ton, and prices should apply uniformly to all sectors. Policy that ensures consistency in emissions pricing across the economy is vastly preferable to special treatment of one sector. Second, Canada already has the necessary policy tools in place to reduce emissions from all sectors of the economy. The question, just a few more sentences, please. The question is whether the existing emissions price is sufficiently stringent to meet these targets and sends a long-term signal to firms to invest in large-scale and expensive emissions reductions. Third, using existing policy mechanism avoids complexity and unnecessary and higher costs for the same emissions reductions. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering questions, and I apologize for going over.
Good. Thank you for your opening statements, Ms. Winter, and sorry to rush you at the end there. There'll still be lots of time for discussion at the end. We're going to go to Environmental Defence Canada, and I believe that Mr. Marshall is going to be providing those opening statements. So if that's correct, Mr. Marshall, over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. I'm joining from the unceded territory of Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples, also called Ottawa. I'd like to start with today's report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which frankly paints a terrifying picture of our future if Canada and the world doesn't tackle fossil fuels with the urgency needed. The report states, the scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. The blind spot in climate change for Canada for 30 years has been the oil and gas industry. While other sectors have reduced greenhouse gas emissions, oil and gas companies massively increased their production and emissions. And emissions from Canada's fossil fuel exports are increasing even more rapidly and are now greater than Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions. But now Canada has an opportunity to shine a light on that blind spot and address the root cause of climate change, fossil fuel production and use. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau committed to cap oil and gas emissions today and ensure they decrease tomorrow at a pace and scale needed to reach net zero by 2050. This will be the defining moment for the Prime Minister's legacy on climate change. The oil and gas lobby will attempt to weaken, delay, or kill this policy because it disrupts their business model of pumping more and more fossil fuels into the global market and more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Many companies, including the major oil sands companies, have actually pledged to reach net zero by 2050, the goal of this policy. So why have so many oil executives already opposed it? Pure greenwashing. Their net zero plans are vague and weak, with far off promises, loopholes to allow emission reductions from other sectors in other countries, a reliance on false solutions for the oil and gas sector like carbon capture and storage and blue hydrogen, and an expectation that Canadian governments will hand over $50 billion or more in subsidies to realize them. The Prime Minister must not blink from the inevitable pressure and hostile attacks from big oil's lobby and PR machine. The IPCC noted that, and I quote, misinformation and active resistance to climate action from the oil and gas industry have made us more vulnerable, end quote. It's time for the federal government to act in the interest of all Canadians. And the oil and gas emissions cap is a key part of this. But to do so, the government must, one, set hard caps for 2025 and 2030 that represent the oil and gas sector's fair share of emission reductions. For 2030, that's a 60% reduction below 2005 levels, or 65 million tons. Two, include all emissions from the production and use of oil and gas. Addressing only production emissions means ignoring 80% of the problem. Three, deny subsidies and loopholes to oil and gas companies. The polluter pays principle must apply here. Canadian oil and gas companies will make $200 billion in profits in 2021 and 2022. And yet they shamelessly go to Canadian governments cap in hand asking for corporate welfare to reduce emissions. And four, put people first. The oil and gas cap must be aligned with a full and sincere implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and a fair, managed, and government-funded transition for workers and communities. These are ambitious caps that we're calling for, but they are possible and they are appropriate. So how can those caps be met? In addition to placing a hard cap using the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, there are four complementary actions that the federal government should take. First, stop approving new oil and gas projects. Economic attrition would shrink Canadian oil and gas production by over 30% this decade and reduce carbon emissions commensurate with that. That includes the offshore oil project Baie du Nord, which will be a carbon bomb for the planet. Two, strengthen methane regulations immediately. At least 20% of GHG emissions from oil and gas facilities are in the form of methane, and yet reducing those is very cheap. Today, oil and gas methane can be reduced by 88% at less than $25 a ton. Three, call the industry's bluff on emissions intensity. The industry has committed to getting to net zero by 2050. If that were achievable, then emissions intensity should improve considerably this decade. 4, remain steadfast on a hard enforceable cap with stiff penalties for non-compliance. If the other 3 measures aren't enough for the oil and gas sector to do its fair share of emission reductions, then companies will have to curtail production. The alternative is to let companies escape responsibility and impose catastrophic impacts on the rest of us. This is a critical test for the Prime Minister. Despite the progress on climate policy in recent years, Canadian greenhouse gas emissions remain unacceptably high. The Prime Minister must remain steadfast in the face of the inevitable ferocious attacks from the oil and gas lobby and put into place a robust regulations to curb pollution from Canada's biggest polluters. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your opening comments. And now we're going to go to TC Energy Corporation. Who's going to do the opening comments for that?
I'll be making the opening statement, Mr. Chair.
Okay. You have 5 minutes. Please proceed as soon as you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello and good afternoon, committee members. TC Energy recognizes the important work this committee is doing to seek out and listen to a wide range of perspectives on development of an oil and gas emissions cap, and we appreciate the invitation to share our views. With over 65 years of experience, TC Energy is a leader in the responsible development and reliable operation of North American energy infrastructure. We recognize the importance of addressing climate change and the significant undertaking to transition Canada's economy for a low carbon future. In October 2021, we announced new targets to reduce the GHG emissions intensity from our own operations by 30% by 2030, and are positioning the company to achieve net zero emissions from our operations by 2050. We support the goals of the Paris Agreement and are ready to undertake the critical challenge before us as we move to a low carbon future. We know strong climate change policy will take collective effort amongst industry, governments, communities, and consumers to achieve meaningful emissions reductions. As government considers the scope for an oil and gas emissions cap, we believe the desired policy intent can be achieved by focusing solely on direct GHG emissions occurring within oil and gas industry operations. Focusing on Scope 1 emissions adheres to the principle of environmental responsibility and liability, which form the foundation of environmental regimes in Canada and internationally. Moreover, focusing solely on Scope 1 emissions will help avoid double counting, regulatory and decarbonization inefficiencies, negative energy security and economic impacts, and implications to cross-jurisdictional collaboration, both interprovincially and internationally. In doing so, government can utilize existing complementary levers such as carbon pricing, methane regulations, clean electricity standard, and clean fuel regulations to achieve desired emissions reductions objectives in the most efficient and cost-effective way for industry and consumers. We see numerous opportunities to decarbonize our own pipeline operations in both the near and long term. Asset modernization will help reduce vented and fugitive methane emissions associated with regular operations and maintenance and improve overall operational efficiency. We've already achieved notable operational emission reductions through turbine retrofits. To address methane emissions, we recently piloted a field trial of a zero emissions vacuum compressor during inline inspection. We intend to reduce our carbon footprint by converting gas compressor stations to electric motor drives and decarbonize our power consumption by sourcing renewable and low carbon power. Renewable natural gas and hydrogen blending opportunities will further reduce our emissions profile. In Quebec, TC Energy has transported renewable natural gas from 2 landfill sites since 2002 and helped advance the province's standards for biomethane transportation. Through the Alberta Carbon Grid, TC Energy will play a key role in deploying carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology. We are actively developing and deploying advanced software and systems to enhance our ability to monitor and track emissions across our systems. Government must ensure industry's ability to adhere to an oil and gas emissions cap is achievable and economically efficient. The inability for the oil and gas sector to cost effectively decarbonize to levels required by an overly restrictive emissions cap would effectively create a cap on production with irreversible impacts on energy security, reliability, and affordability. This would significantly impact both Canada's economy and balance of trade, while having a negligible impact on global emissions as production moves to jurisdictions with inferior ESG profiles. For context, the Canadian oil and gas sector provided $105 billion to Canada's GDP while supporting nearly 400,000 jobs in 2020. Commodity price recovery since 2020 will significantly increase this figure in the years following. Inefficient cap implementation would jeopardize the sector's key contribution to both national jobs and GDP, while negatively impacting energy affordability for other industrial sectors and Canadian consumers. A healthy oil and gas industries also needed to allow industry to support economic reconciliation priorities and financial opportunities for Indigenous groups. At TC Energy, we want the future of Canadian energy development to be more equitable and inclusive for Indigenous peoples and communities, and we are taking action to contribute to lasting change through our own Reconciliation Action Plan. Projects like Coastal GasLink are providing significant benefits to Indigenous communities with over $1 billion in contract awards to Indigenous businesses or their joint venture partner businesses. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to provide you with TC Energy's overarching perspectives, and I'll be glad to address any questions you may have at the appropriate time.
Thank you for your comments. And could I get you, while you still have the mic, the correct pronunciation for your name, so when we do the questioning, we get it right, because I may not have got it right when I introduced you and welcomed you.
You were pretty close. It's Robert Tarvidas.
Okay, thanks very much. And our last opening statement will be from Trottier Energy Institute with Mr. Langlois Bertrand. And so I'll turn it over to you for 5 minutes.
Great. Merci pour l'invitation puis pour l'occasion de fournir des informations.
Thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to give you some information on such an important subject. I hope that this will be useful for your consideration. I'm going to be speaking in English, but I will answer questions in whatever question they're asked in.
Are based on two sets of work. The first is the extensive modeling work we did as part of our Canadian Energy Outlook, which we publish every few years, which assesses trajectories to meet different GHG reduction targets, including the current 2030 and 2050 targets. The second set of work is sectoral analysis that we do for the shorter term, including more recent trends and how actors are moving at the moment. So when considering the cap, to get to the 2030 GHG reduction target of 40 to 45% compared with 2005 levels, which is to say roughly today's emission levels, Canada needs 5% year-over-year reductions for the entire economy. So to achieve this short-term target, it's necessary to focus on sectors where deep emission reductions are possible in the shorter term, while at the same time initiating changes in other sectors where short-term reductions are more challenging. Meeting the 2030 targets means that the government must focus on sectors that can transform deeply in less than a decade, but at the same time, it cannot delay starting the broader changes needed for the 2050 net zero goals in sectors that will move more slowly. So the corollary to this is that for some sectors, it's very difficult to foresee a 40 to 45% reduction by 2030. This can be due to cost, for instance, in sectors where technology is in earlier stages of development, like heavy transport. It can also be due to technological challenges, such as in some industrial processes where no low carbon alternative exists at the moment. So for these reasons, the 2030 short-term target must be considered with care, and it implies the identification of these differences across the entire economy. With this in mind, most substantial reductions to achieve the 2030 target should come from the oil and gas sector. This is both the cheapest way to meet the countrywide target and the most straightforward. In our modeling, we estimate the need at more than 60% of emissions reduction for the sector compared with today's levels, and that's assuming that all other sectors are perfectly successful in their own reductions. So although these reduction levels are certainly massive, it's important to note that not reducing emissions from oil and gas production by that extent means that other sectors will have to compensate in order for the economy to meet the 2030 target, which means more expensive and in some cases, more technologically challenging transformations will be needed elsewhere, for instance, in other industries, in the transport sector, and so on. Therefore, this is not to say that deep and rapid reductions in emissions from oil and gas production can substitute for substantial measures as part of the policy portfolio for other sectors. Rather, it's essential to understand that the 2030 target cannot be achieved without a deep transformation in the oil and gas sector. So in terms of the cap, a hard cap of emissions for the sector could be implemented in a variety of ways, and it can lead to transformations of different forms, as previous speakers have noted, but it includes limits to production levels, and of course, also a very rapid ramp up in improvements to emission intensity, carbon capture and storage, where it may be economical, and so on. But the important thing to remember is that imposing this cap through a cap and trade system, for instance, for the industry, could let producers and refiners decide how to meet their obligations. And importantly, the theoretical effect of the cap is to drive innovation and investment, at least that's the idea. But whatever the means to meet the cap, CCS or whatever else, as long as the reductions are there, perhaps that's the most important thing. But perhaps as importantly, the imposition of a cap with a clear schedule for reductions has the benefit of contributing in eliminating one of the key barriers to transformation across all industries, which is the policy uncertainty surrounding the climate pledges. To initiate the investments and encourage innovation needed to achieve our climate targets, industry actors need a stable investment environment, and a stringent cap on emissions from the most emission-intensive sector would certainly be an important stepping stone in doing this. Although it's not limited to choosing to impose a cap or not in order to reduce emissions, given the depth of the transformation that we're talking about here and the fact that part of this industry may need to reduce production to meet the cap, any measure should be accompanied by support to offset any negative economic impacts from decarbonization on communities and workers, proportional, hopefully, to the economic disruption caused by meeting specific targets. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody for your opening statements. Just before we get into our rounds of questions, we've received a notice since the meeting started from the Procedure and House Affairs Committee that a change to our committee has been formalized. So with that, I'd like to officially welcome Mr. McLean and Mr. Bragdon, who will now be our regular members of our committee. So welcome, and Mr. McLean, I know you've been here before, so welcome back.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to the colleagues as well.
Of course, I'd also like to acknowledge that you're here and joining us once again, so it's good to see you as well. We're going to go into our rounds of questions, and so each of the first four members will have 6 minutes. And for the witnesses, I know some of you have been here before. For those who are first times, I very much let the members control their time, and they will decide who they're going to be asking the question to. And if you have something, you can try raising your hand, but it will be up to the member to decide if they want to go there or if they want to pursue their own line of questioning. Sometimes they can be a bit short just because they have a limited amount of time and want to get through as much testimony as they can. So with that, we'll get started. And Mr. Melillo, I believe you're up first. So over to you, and you have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time to join us today and have a conversation about this important topic. I'd like to start with the folks from TC Energy, whoever's going to answer. You mentioned in the opening remarks a bit about economic reconciliation. It's obviously an important principle, I think, to all the industry that we have across the country. It's important in my riding, and of course with oil and gas as well. So I'm just wondering, a bit of a broad question to start off with, if you could speak a bit about the importance of economic reconciliation and the impacts that oil and gas projects can have in First Nations, particularly in Western Canada.
Certainly, and thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, one of the defining factors of the oil and gas industry is that a lot of the activity takes place in fairly remote places in Canada, which also happens to be where a lot of Indigenous communities are located. So in some circumstances, participating economically in the development of energy in Canada provides some of these communities with one of the few opportunities they have for economic participation. So if as the development has occurred in some of these communities, they've actually had the opportunities to participate meaningfully in through both contracting and direct employment. If there was a decrease in, obviously, the development of energy in those places, then you would see a concurrent decrease in the opportunities for Indigenous communities to participate in the development of energy, and also fewer opportunities.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, limited time, I don't mean to cut you off, but try to get as many questions as I can. And I'll come back to you as well, because I know the oil and gas sector specifically has done a lot of work to innovate, to find ways of doing things more sustainably and more environmentally friendly. Again, another broad question to you. Can you chat a bit about some of the work that your organization has done to ensure that production is innovating and is as environmentally sustainable as possible?
Well, just to be clear, we are a midstream company, so we actually don't produce any oil and gas ourselves. We are primarily a transportation company and a power company. I can talk very briefly, though, to the fact that we participate with a number of universities and a number of industry associations and fund a number of R&D initiatives to make sure that things like emissions monitoring, methane monitoring, are done as efficiently as possible, and that we're pushing the bounds on those all the time.
Thank you very much for the answer. I appreciate that. Obviously, as well, there's been a discussion in the last week or so, looking at what's happening in Europe with Russian aggression, with the horrible war we're seeing now in Ukraine. As a result, I think it's really sparking a conversation across the country about Canada's ability to be more energy independent and produce more here at home. And according to what I see on my phone here on Twitter, the Prime Minister has actually said that he plans to ban all imports of Russian crude. I don't know if my colleagues across the way can confirm that or not for me, but that's definitely something that I think is a positive step that our country should take. And again, it goes back to how important it is that we're supporting a Canadian industry here. So can I get your thoughts on how you feel an emissions cap might impact projects in Canada, specifically if it's more of a broader cap on production rather than on emissions specifically?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. The very nature of energy security, of course, is very much top of mind given the events unfolding, unfortunately, in Eastern Europe right now, as is often the case. Yet we also saw the United Nations report come out concurrently, which kind of paints this very bleak picture, of course, of a climate change future. I think that it is, though, possible for the oil and gas industry to continue to produce with some of the technologies that are out there, like carbon capture and storage and direct capture from the atmosphere. And so I don't see that increased or keeping production the same or increased production is completely incompatible with meeting emissions goals. But I'd say, again, it depends on what the policy outcome you want. Are you trying to reduce emissions, or are you trying to reduce production of the oil and gas industry? And I think that designing an emissions cap inappropriately could have unintended consequences, specifically with reducing the production of oil and gas when it may not be necessary to do so if emissions reductions are ultimately your goal.
And would you have any worries or any reservations that an emissions cap could ultimately result in carbon leakage?
Well, as I said in my opening statement, I think that is a very real possibility that a hard emissions cap, which results in a production cap or an effective cap on production or even a decrease in production, would likely result in leakage to other jurisdictions that perhaps don't have as strict environmental standards as Canada does.
Okay, I appreciate that. I don't think I have really any time for a question, but the next one I would have asked would have been in terms of the effectiveness of an emissions cap, and I'd be curious to get the thoughts of the witnesses on whether or not we should be looking at a cap across sectors, across the country, or specifically to oil and gas. But I am out of time. Unfortunately, I can't have any of you answer that right now. But if you can keep it in mind, if it happens to come up in future questions, I'd appreciate it. And thank you again for your time.
And I'd like to just either remind or let each of the witnesses know that you are invited to send in additional information based on your interactions today. We ask it to be kept to no more than 10 pages. But if you do have things that you would like to, questions that were unanswered or additional thoughts that you have, please feel free to send that in through our clerk, and she'll get that information to our committee. We're going to go now to Mr. Shahal, who will have 6 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Shahal.
Thank you, Chair. And I also want to thank all the witnesses for joining us today, and welcome new members, Mr. McLean from my city of Calgary, and Mr. Bragdon to the committee as well. Look forward to working with you. I'll start off my question with Ms. Winter. Ms. Winter, what forms of support do you believe the Government of Canada should provide for technological development to reduce emissions? And what measures do you believe are less effective in reducing emissions?
Thank you for the question. I would say that support for technological innovation should be put in place to address market failures. And so by that, I mean not just the problem of emissions reductions, but market failures in the fact that innovation is a public good. So the benefits to society are broader than the benefits to the innovator. And so the policies should be of course, carefully constructed to address that question and also to consider overlap between policies, and that emissions pricing itself provides that signal for innovation.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to Mr. Tarvidas. Mr. Tarvidas, the role of natural gas to a net zero future. There's been a lot of talk of natural gas being that bridge. What is the role of natural gas moving forward to a net zero future? And what are the challenges and opportunities with investments in natural gas and natural gas infrastructure?
Thank you for your question, Honourable Member. Mr. Chair, natural gas has already played, I think, an important role in transitioning to a lower carbon environment. The United States has achieved dramatic reductions in their own GHG emissions by moving from coal to natural gas-fired power, and the same has happened in some jurisdictions here in Canada. So we're already seeing, I think, the role that natural gas can play and will continue to play. I think that here in Alberta, we've seen that the phasing out of coal, I think much earlier than even originally planned, is at least partially the direct result of the move to natural gas powered generation. Natural gas also continues to play, I think, a pivotal role in certain industries where fuel substitution is either uneconomic or not even viable in some instances. And then don't forget that natural gas also plays a role as a feedstock in petrochemicals. So its only use is not necessarily just in being burned to provide energy along the way. So I think that it's probably safe to say that natural gas has already played an important role in the transition, will continue to play, I think, in the role in the transition. And at some point in time, with the opportunity for things like carbon capture and storage or the direct capture of emissions from the atmosphere, it should be possible that natural gas can continue to play a role in the energy mix going forward.
I'm glad you mentioned, because that was my next question on carbon capture and storage, and your role as TC Energy and the Alberta Carbon Grid. As an Alberta NP, this is energy is top of mind for all Albertans and all types of energy. We want to be a global energy leader in all things energy, including clean energy. The role of the Alberta Carbon Grid in meeting our future goals and how we're going to achieve it. What type of investment is required to achieving our goals, and what type of investment has TC Energy made in this?
I'm sorry, can I ask for clarification, Mr. Member? When you say, are you looking for a quantum of dollars, or are you just looking for a general statement about sort of the kind of investment that would be required in this area?
Well, I think a bit of both. A total investment to reach our goals from your perspective, and a current investment by your company in this Alberta Carbon Grid to meet our goals and what you're doing.
Well, thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, the quantum in terms of carbon capture and storage, even within the Alberta context, is probably going to require investments in the billions of dollars. I think the Alberta Carbon Grid as envisioned right now is probably sort of on the order of magnitude of many billions of dollars, probably 5 or more along that lines. Right now, our investment has largely been limited to sort of investigative studies and doing some of the preliminary regulatory work. So it would be in the millions of dollars that we would have invested so far.
And do you believe that these investments made can be done without government incentives? Can industry do it alone?
I think that, well, anything is possible, Honourable Member. I think that when we look across the North American environment, though, we do operate in a competitive environment, especially with the US. The US does have an example of a tax credit for carbon capture and storage, which probably has led them to take a bit of a lead in terms of that technology. I think we can still catch up, but I do believe that obviously the technologies can be accelerated with the use of potentially some sort of a tax incentive from government.
Thank you for that. I believe my time's up. Thank you, Chair.
It is up, and so now we're going to go to Monsieur Simard, who has 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On est bien.
Thank you very much. We are off on the right foot, and I'd like to continue along the same vein. I'd like to know from the TC Energy people. In your presentation earlier, you were mentioning that the sector will not be able to remain profitable if the rules are too strict. So it's somewhat difficult for me to see how the oil and gas sector's intensity can be reduced without huge investments to develop these capture and storage strategies. And perhaps the representative of TC Energy could tell us clearly whether this is something that can be done only by the industry without any financial support from the government.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Mr. Chair, I think there is two parts to the question, so I'll try and address both of them. In my opening statement comments, what I was specifically referring to is the risk that a very prescriptive regulatory framework for an emissions cap would reduce the degrees of freedom for operators in the oil and gas sector to comply. So obviously, the more prescriptive the regulatory environment, typically the more expensive it is to comply. And that's why you heard some of the statements from some of the economists.
Je voudrais juste peut-être vous.
Perhaps if I could simply bring you back, I don't want to cut you off, but perhaps I could direct your intervention, because in Professor Leach's, I think it was his presentation, he said that there has never been such an intensive barrel of oil as now. In other words, they're not seeing a decreasing intensity, but an increasing intensity per barrel. So what I want to know is, right now, it seems to me that we're being sold the idea that we could have oil with a lower carbon footprint. And I believe that that's impossible given the rules of profitability. If you're trying to reduce intensity, then necessarily you have to invest in R&D. So I want to know whether your sector is profitable, and if this is something that can be done, does it need the government support? Because if not, if it needs it, then we're in big trouble. I'd like a clear answer, please.
I thank you, Honourable Member. Mr. Chair, if I understand the question to be whether the industry can support R&D without government tax credits, the answer is yes. But in a globally and certainly continentally competitive environment, it's probably important to keep Canadian industry on the same footing as U.S. industry, and that's where potentially tax credits come into play.
Peut-être simplement vous souligner que on sait qu'il y a deux.
Perhaps I could point out that we know that there are two major projects looking at carbon sequestration and capture in Alberta. We know that 57% of the funding for these two projects is coming from Alberta and the federal government. So that tells me that your sector of activity is not able to reduce your carbon intensity when you make your production. And now we're being told that not only can't you not reduce the carbon intensity, but you don't want to cap either. So your solution to reduce the oil and gas emissions, I just don't see where your solution is. You want everybody else and every other sector to bear the brunt of the emissions production when you are the leading producer of emissions.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure where the honourable member got the idea that I'm not, or my company's not in favor of a cap. I actually indicated that we were in favor of it during my opening statements.
Un plafond, oui, mais ce que j'aimerais savoir de vous, c'est...
A cap, yes, but what I'd like to know from you is this. Can this cap be achieved without the support of the federal government? In other words, without some funding coming from the federal government? Is it possible without that funding?
Mr. Chair, I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I believe that right now there has been interest from government levels in supporting the development of this new technology, and just like any new technology, including some renewable energy sources, were all supported by government initially, and probably would not have been as economic as quickly as they otherwise would have been the case. So I think that that's no different in the case of carbon capture and storage.
J'ai peut-être une petite question rapide.
Perhaps I have another quick question from Ms. Winter. You said in your presentation that the source of emissions doesn't matter. We shouldn't just be targeting oil and gas. But I can give you examples where I'm from, aluminum is a very important sector. And in a few years, they'll be able to produce net zero aluminum thanks to inert anodes. R&D was pretty much entirely paid for by Rio Tinto, who decided to just go into this. When I see the mountains of public money being invested in the oil and gas sector in Canada, well, I think that this is, I mean, how can you say that you shouldn't care about where emissions are coming from? We know that the problem is oil, so not looking at the source of emissions is making all of the other sectors bear the brunt. And we have an intervener, a stakeholder, who told us that the same thing earlier. Do you agree with this statement?
Thank you for the question. Respectfully, I would say that the problem of emissions is due to consumers. Firms are supplying the products that consumers want, and the fossil fuel sector is a cheap source of energy. My comment about where emissions come from is that what we should focus on is the least cost emissions reductions first, not target specific sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. When we're out of time on that. So now we're going to go over to Mr. Angus, who will have his 6 minutes in first round of questions.
Thank you. It's a great honor always to sit at this table. I sometimes feel as though I'm living in a world of disconnect because this is a conversation I think would have been great in 2004, 2006, 2008, and we would have all trusted that things are going to get done. Yet I read the IPCC report today. It is painting a picture of a catastrophe unfolding in real time, and it completely goes after the big emitters, countries failing to do their job, talking about an atlas of human suffering and a damning indictment of failed climate leadership. And yet I see, well, you know, we'll just carry on and things will work. Mr. Marshall, I'd like to ask you, based on what you're seeing from the IPCC and based on Canada's record, do we have any chance of meeting our international targets at the rate we're going?
Well, we're going to need stronger policies to do that. As I said, the blind spot or the sore thumb for Canada for the longest time has been the oil and gas industry. And unless we put into place the kinds of policies that are needed to address those emissions in a real way, we're not going to reach our targets. And let's remember, the target that we have in place is the weakest in the G7, right? By every measure, Canada's climate record is the worst in the G7. We have the weakest target. Our emissions have gone up the most. I'm
going to jump in there because the Environment Commissioner accused this government of being an outlier, of being the worst in the G7. Minister Wilkinson said it was a difference of opinion. I think that's one heck of a difference of opinion. I asked Minister Guilbeault about the IPCC report today because I've not actually heard the Liberals ever talk about the cap since the Prime Minister announced it at COP26, patted himself on the back and went home. Minister Guilbeault said today that carbon pricing wasn't enough. Mr. Marshall, do you believe that carbon pricing is enough to bring down the rapidly growing emissions that we see predicted for the oil sands sector?
No, we need an additional measure that is going to ensure the certainty of the emission reductions. And that's a hard cap that's enforceable, that has sanctions for those companies that go beyond their cap. That can be put into place through the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. It's been done in the past with sulfur dioxide, for example, for acid rain. In order to have the certainty of the emission reductions from the fastest growing source of pollution, of carbon pollution, we need a real measure that is going to address directly the carbon emissions.
I think this is really interesting because I come from Northern Ontario where our lakes were being destroyed by acid rain and they brought in clear caps and now our lakes have come back. Because we're told all the time, and we've heard it today, that the market will figure this out. You know, you put a price on carbon and emissions are going to go down. And yet Canada's energy regulator has factored the price of carbon in, and they're expecting at least 1 million barrels a day increase. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers know what the upcoming price on carbon is going to be, and they're talking about major increases. And what they're talking about is major increases for export because they know it's not going to be counted as emissions. So if industry and our regulator is planning a 1 million barrel a day increase, helped obviously by the $21 billion in TMX pipeline to get this to export, do we have any credible sense that this government's cap is going to in any way reduce emissions?
Well, that's the thing. You look at the carbon price, which was and the increase that was announced several years ago now, and yet you look at the Rystad Cube data, and oil and gas companies are planning on increasing their production and emissions by 30% between now and 2030.
And they've factored in the carbon price, and it is still extremely profitable for them to do that. I want to ask you though about this issue of intensity targets, because I remember the Harper government was intensity targets all the time. It's sort of like we're told, don't worry, if we deal with intensity targets, we're going to lower emissions. It's kind of like telling people, listen, if you're a teenager and you smoke light cigarettes, you're not going to get cancer, because we haven't actually ever seen the emissions go down. The emissions have gone up consistently over the last 20 years. How important do you think it is to put the full nature of the emissions in? Because the emissions from oil and gas export, those emissions are more than all the emissions put together in all the sectors. If we counted that in, would we have a much clearer picture of Canada's massive carbon imprint on the planet at this time of crisis?
That's why we have to address the full scope of emissions, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So the downstream emissions should be included in this cap, and they can be addressed through policy that is in federal jurisdiction.
I'm running out of time here.
Oh,
I just want to ask you very quickly, because I'm running out of time. The cap, what should it begin at? Should we allow for an increase of 30%? Should we be at 2019 levels? How should we bring down to meet what we need? We're telling the world we'll meet by 2030. What would that cap have to include as a hard cap to actually get us there?
I mean, our proposal is that the cap starts in 2019 levels, but decreases to a level in 2030 that's 60% below 2005. That's Canada's fair share. That gets us to 64 megatons. That is a significant decrease, but as I laid out in my comments, there are a number of ways that the federal government within its jurisdiction can ensure that that cap is met.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, and I appreciate everybody moving this along. We're now going to go to Mr. McGuire, and he will have 5 minutes for his round of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would certainly like to follow up and thank all of our colleagues or our online visitors today for their presentations, the witnesses. I just wanted to touch base and thanks to Mr. Tarvidas for his presentation from Energy Corporation, TC. The goal is to try and bring down the greenhouse gas emissions, and you wanted to be a premier source of carbon-free energy around, well, for North America particularly, which helps the world in the industrial, natural gas, and oil sectors. And so, I guess the investments in technology is one way to do that, but I want to ask you a question about what's happening on the ground today. There's lots of changes in the last few days, and numerous people have been calling on the government governments around the world, not just here in Canada, to stop purchasing Russian energy. It's clear that if countries cut them off, Canada couldn't immediately meet that energy in places like Western Europe, and it is relevant. It's not just looking after ourselves; it's looking after our allies as well. So, while it's too early to determine that worldwide long-term energy implications due to Putin's unprovoked war, I'd like to ask you what advice you could have to the government on building that uncertainty into this emissions cap regulation process.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And Mr. Chair, the question of, I think, energy security and potentially reliability is one that actually does require, I think, long-term investments. So one of the asks that we would have of this committee and this government is that as you're considering developing policy instruments related to emissions caps, is to take a long-term view to provide industry with as much certainty as possible because of the very long lead time for some of these investments, the very high capital cost of some of these investments. And obviously, as you stated, Honorable Member, you can't create LNG terminals overnight. You can't build pipelines overnight. These things take many years to put in place. But as the world considers the role of energy security and energy reliability as we go forward, even in the context of the global climate crisis, I think it is important that this government consider the importance of providing policy stability and certainty as they consider these regulations going forward. There's another component of that too, if I may add, which is the consideration of how these policies interplay with each other. Our recommendation is that any policy that's put in place is consistent with the Paris Agreement and is consistent with existing policies that are already in place. It would be, I think, quite helpful to see a comprehensive study of all the climate policies that are already in place in Canada at the federal and provincial level, and actually see how they currently interact with each other.
Thank you. That's interesting. The other side of that is if Russian energy was removed completely from world markets, does Canada have the distribution and production means to help fill that gap in order to cut off the Putin regime from those dollars right now? I mean, Bill C-69 comes to mind, but there's other areas, and I'd be most interested in your thoughts in regards to what would happen if, what would our distribution production systems look like if Russian energy was completely cut off?
For clarity, Honourable Member, are you talking about just within the Canadian domestic context, or could Canada play a broader international role?
Well, could Canada play a broader role? Because if it was cut off from the rest of the world, I meant the Russian production or the exports and their production, as may need to be done here, what would Canada's role be, and where are we at in regards to the distribution and production that we have presently?
Well, Canada does have substantial resources of both oil and gas. And so to the extent that there was a requirement for Canada or other nations to step in to fill the gap that was left by an isolated Russia, I think that Canada would have the resource base to do so. In terms of the infrastructure to get those resources to market, obviously, there's probably at the margin, there is some capacity to increase production of both oil and gas, less so on the oil side. And it would require some additional investment, I think, in infrastructure to make that happen.
Yeah, even on the short term for the needs that we may see. We've talked about this system being an energy. Okay. My third, just a quick one.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'll go right to this one. What role do you think nuclear energy could have in Canada getting to net zero?
Well, as the member may be aware, TC Energy is actually an investor in the Bruce Nuclear Power plant. We are a substantial investor in there, so we do believe that nuclear power can contribute to energy security and to a low carbon future.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Lapointe, we're going to go to you, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Merci, Président Aldag, et je souhaite le bien.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our new members.
To Mr. Leach. And Mr. Leach, you've done extensive work in this field, and I'd like to ask you about your work specifically with the Smart Prosperity Institute and the Greening Growth Partnership. So the Institute states that their vision is, and this is a direct quote, stronger, cleaner economy that builds a better future for all Canadians. We are dedicated to realizing a thriving economy, healthy environment, and high quality of life, achieved through decoupling environmental harm from economic success. So in practical terms, I'd be interested in hearing from you, what should be some best practices that could be adopted for realizing that vision with success?
Well, I certainly don't speak for Smart Prosperity on their grant as a co-investigator, but certainly if you want their overall position, I'd encourage you to bring some of their leadership team to speak. On the more general question, I think the starting point for any economist is make sure the costs of production, all of them are internal to those, and consumption as well, are internal to those making the decisions. So that when you decide to produce oil and gas, that the emissions, the tailings, the environmental damage associated with that production are not passed on to someone else without you having to pay that freight. And as a consumer, that those costs are reflected in the prices that you pay. So whether it's carbon pricing, whether it's the acid rain program type policies that Mr. Angus talked about earlier, I believe, that had a big impact in your region, I believe, as well. Those are all examples of things where we've put the costs of environmental damage into the business decision. And that, to me, is always the gateway to that type of linking environmental performance with economic prosperity.
Thank you. Last September, just before the federal election, you wrote a blog that was entitled, "There's Only One Climate Vote in This Election, and it's for the Liberals." And you said, and again, this will be a direct quote from your blog, that the Trudeau government had to fight for every inch of their policy progress in the courts, in the election campaigns of 2015 and 2019, and almost every day in between. And at every step, they were fighting the resistance. That was the term that you used. The coalition of Conservative provincial premiers and their allies in the opposition and Senate benches in Ottawa committed to stopping progress on climate policy in Canada. How do you see federal policy developing efficiently and effectively at the rate we need to see to meet climate goals when continually being challenged, in your words, by the resistance?
Well, I think what's more important is to focus on what you've done and why I wrote that post, which was exactly as you said. We've fought to get these policies into place, and we have a full toolkit of what we need to meet Canada's emissions goals. So what Canada needs right now is to refine those policies, to strengthen those policies, to get the remaining bits, clean fuels, for example, across the finish line. And so the tenor I was taking today was more, we don't need to start another fight. We don't need to come into another constitutionally fraught regulatory agenda when you already have the tools you need. So if I were to look back at that blog post, that's where I would take it.
Thank you. My next question is to Ms. Levin. And as a government, we're very conscious that individuals and families support themselves through Canada's oil and gas sector. And we also know that we need to take urgent action on climate change. So with that in mind, can you share with us your thoughts on how we can support a transition for energy workers while we work to meet emission reduction goals?
Thank you for that question. I would say that in terms of supporting the communities that will be impacted by the energy transition, because the energy transition is happening whether we bury our heads in the sand and listen to oil and gas companies or we don't. The transition is happening. Our oil and gas will never be the last barrel standing. It's among the most carbon intensive and most expensive. So that transition is happening. The best thing we can do to support communities and workers is to be honest with them about what's going on and put in place plans and supports and a just transition strategy that the government has committed to that really make sure that no one is left behind. We're at a turning point where we can do what we did, for example, with the collapse of the cod industry and pretend it's not happening and not help those workers out, or we could put in place a plan today that brings all of those communities and workers alongside with us. And you've heard on this panel from leaders like Jill McGowan from the Alberta Federation of Labor, who had really great suggestions on exactly how those just transition mechanisms need to be built out alongside this oil and gas emissions cap.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to go to Monsieur Simard, and you will have 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I may have a quick question for Mr. Marshall. You spoke about 4 measures that could be implemented to be able to approach our targets. And you talked about the industry's bluff when it comes to emission intensity. Could you tell us more about what you mean by the industry's bluff and calling their bluff?
L'industrie a dit que
Well, the industry said that they're going to get to net zero in 2050. But to be able to reach that target, they're going to have to reduce emissions per barrel by 2030. So it's really to say to industry, show us the money. Show us how you're actually going to be on the path to that goal. Dr. Leach told us already that carbon intensity per barrel in Canada has been increasing. And it's been increasing for the last 30 years. So the federal government has to do something to be sure that these reductions are going to happen, not per barrel, but on an absolute basis.
Il y a un professeur.
A professor emeritus came to see us a few weeks ago, Mr. Bruno de Tonk, and he told us that there is no serious research other than research funded by the industry when it comes to carbon capture strategies. Now, I don't want to repeat a joke that was already published, but do you think that a low carbon intensity oil is the equivalent of a light cigarette, or a diet poutine? Is this just an illusion that makes it possible for the sector to keep on producing and to feel good? So they often use Indigenous communities as though reducing production would seriously harm the Indigenous community's development. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. First of all, that technology has not been demonstrated on a large-scale timeframe for oil and gas emissions. But what's important here is that it only targets 20% of emissions of the oil and gas sector. Only the production emissions are captured. So even if the technology were perfect, and it's far from being perfect, but even if it were, that's only addressing only 20% of the problem of climate change. The 80% is when you're burning that oil, either in Canada or for Canadian oil. Most of it is being burnt abroad. But when you have alternatives, i.e. electric vehicles, renewable energies, batteries, that's the path you should be following. Storage and capture could be important for maybe the steel industry or certain sectors. But there are zero-emission alternatives. And these are alternatives to oil and gas.
Mr. Angus, it's over to you. You have 2.5 minutes. Everybody else ran the clock a little bit, pushed it, so I'll cut you a little bit of slack here.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Langlois-Bertrand, I'd like to ask you a question because when I read the Canadian Energy Regulators' predictions for oil production in Canada, factoring in the carbon price, he's factoring in an extra at least 1 million barrels a year, and up to 2050 there will either be in one scenario as much or more oil production than now, or just slightly less, which doesn't really seem to me very credible if the Prime Minister's saying we're going to have this major cut by 2030. So do you believe that the carbon pricing alone is a credible way of ensuring that we meet our targets?
Thank you for the question. I don't. I don't think it's enough. I don't think the industry is, at least according to our own modeling and the CER's modeling as well, which is completely different, The results are similar in that the lesson to take, which is that the industry is not responsive enough to the kind of levels of pricing that we're talking about. So whether or not it leads automatically to you considering a cap on emissions as the most effective tool is a question I'll leave up to you. But certainly the pricing as we know it now, including the schedule to 2030, is not enough to take us anywhere near what's needed in terms of reductions here.
Thank you. I mean, you talk about the industry not being responsive enough to meeting the targets that everyone's agreed on, but they certainly are very responsive in getting answers or audiences with the government. I think we counted now 6,800 meetings with the Liberal government. That's like 4 meetings a day. Pretty spectacular backroom access. So I have not heard anybody from the Liberals talk about an emissions cap since the Prime Minister made the statement. So I'd like to get a clear picture from you. You say a 60% reduction in levels in oil and gas by 2030 would be what we would need. So what would this emissions cap actually look like to ensure that it is something that's credible to the Canadian people?
Yeah, the figure I'm stating is from our last modeling effort. And the idea here is to try to optimize what's the lowest cost to get us to the economy-wide 2030 target. And in that exercise, we find that by far, it's to focus first and foremost on the oil and gas sector. Now, of course, there are other indirect costs. There's a lot of employment to take care of. Many other speakers and myself have noted the need to take care of the communities and workers impacted by these measures. But the fact remains, if you don't do it that way, you have to do it in some other way, so other sectors, and that's going to be more expensive. So you can make a choice.
Just to finalize, because I've run out of time here, but
yeah,
just pretty much a yes or no. So what we're using right now is not going to get us to the 2030 promises that we made internationally if we're just using what we're using now.
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
We're now going to go to Mr. McLean, and you get 5 minutes in this round.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all the guests and all my new colleagues around the table. I'm glad we're discussing our shared goal of reducing emissions around the...
Can I welcome my dear friend, Mr. McLean, to our committee? I haven't had a chance as a member of the New Democratic Party, so I don't want that coming off his time, but I want to welcome him to our clock.
And,
thank you to all my friends around the table as we share our goal in actually getting to a cleaner emission industry and economy across Canada, and I'm glad everybody here is focused on that result. But let me first of all congratulate Mr. Tarvidas on his company's being at the forefront of dealing with the capriciousness of foreign political short-term decisions, especially on Keystone XL, which would have lowered the emission intensity of all the oil consumed in North America, which will now be displaced by foreign oil supplying the United States. And that's one of the things we have to look at here is lowering the emissions of all the energy consumed in the world. Which brings me to the point. I'm going to ask the point of Ms. Winter, because she's an economist and she and I speak somewhat the same language. When you look at these foreign balance of trade, if you will, that we have in Canada, about $80 billion, I think in 2020, $86 billion of foreign trade was accounted for by the oil and gas industry, primarily with the United States, of course. If we took that off, the balance of trade would be exactly how much in Canada? Do you know offhand?
I'm sorry, I don't have that figure at hand.
My apologies, but $86 billion lower. It's about 15% of Canada's export value at this point in time is in oil and gas. So $86 billion versus 30 years ago was $5.5 billion. It is a very important part of our economy. And I'll contradict some of your witness friends around the table, which includes Mr. Leach, because we actually do have data from the Canadian government that shows we've reduced carbon emissions from oil and gas emissions in the oil sands by 33% since 2000. So 20 years, 33%. That's a pretty good reduction here. We still have some carbon, obviously, in our oil and gas production, but we do need to reduce it even further, and every one of us acknowledges that here. In your estimation, Ms. Winter...
Do I get an opportunity to respond?
Ms. Winter, can you please answer the question I have about sorry, Mr. Chair, does Mr. Leach want to respond to something there?
No, it's your floor, so I'll let you decide who you're going to. If nobody picks it up, one of the other people questioning may still do that, but it's your time.
No, I actually like Ms. Winter's statement that a ton of carbon is a ton of carbon is a ton of carbon, because I think it ties in with this government's statements all the time. So if we reduce a ton of carbon out of the US by replacing with more environmental production from Canada, is that net benefit for the world?
So I think what matters overall is global reduction in emissions, and specific for Canada, what we're concerned about is meeting our targets rather than, I think, being concerned about the targets of other countries. And so,
okay, thank you. Does that mean that perhaps we've set the wrong targets, in that we should actually be reducing emissions intensity in Canada's oil production in order for it to displace more emissions-intensive fuel from elsewhere? Because of the $6.5 billion or 6.5 million barrels of oil per day equivalent, counting natural gas, that we produce in Canada, about 3/4 of it is exported. Ms. Winter?
Yes, so that's what concerns Canada. I wouldn't say that we're setting the wrong targets. The targets are what they are. I can comment on the most effective way to meet those targets, which is a cost-effective way, which is to price emissions.
Okay,
and
but if greenhouse gas emissions is a worldwide problem, and we are contributing that by reducing our emissions by 33% per barrel of oil intensity in 20 years, and the rest of the world has increased. And they've increased it because we've offshored production from Canada to Asia primarily because of two reasons: lower labor costs and lower energy costs, two of the most inflationary items we face in an economy. And that's what's happening. We're offshoring our production of hydrocarbons elsewhere for less environmentally friendly options. Would you suggest bring it back on shore would be a better way to reduce carbon emissions?
So our current policies, federally and provincially, are in place to mitigate emissions leakage, including from the oil and gas sector. And so that's by providing output subsidies. And so I can't speak to the relative emissions intensity of Canada's oil and gas versus other countries, but I can say that there are policies in place to prevent the leakage that you're concerned about.
Okay, Mr. Keith, can I ask you a question?
We're out of time. We're actually over time there. Thank you, Mr. Bruce, and we're going to go over to you, and you get 5 minutes on the clock now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just because I believe there were some questions before, I just wanted to make sure to clarify that Canada has not actually imported crude from Russia since 2019, and that, in fact, we are banning further imports. But it's not as of today because, in fact, there are no imports today. My question, actually, I wanted to start with Ms. Winter, Professor Winter, which is, I'm hearing from a whole bunch of witnesses who all want to row to the same place, which is to deal with the fact that we saw the IPCC report today. We know that we need to deal with responding to climate change and reducing emissions quickly. But I'm hearing some people who have a contrary view to yours, which is that they've been saying that an oil and gas cap is absolutely necessary to deal with that problem and to get us there. Like, how, if you're in my position, how do you respond to that? How do you make sense of where to go from there? Because I'm having two very contrary points of views being presented today.
Thank you for that question. We have the policies in place to meet our targets. It's a real question of stringency. And so, yes, moving to $170 Canadian per ton, it may not allow Canada to reach its 2030 targets, and increasing the price after that may not allow Canada to reach its 2050 targets. But that doesn't mean that there needs to be special treatment of the oil and gas sector. There can be an economy-wide increase in the stringency of emissions price to create that incentive for emissions reduction. And there can also be a reduction in the output subsidies provided to sectors designated and as emissions intensive and trade exposed. And that increases their costs, further providing emissions reduction incentives. So, and the other option is broadening the base of what is subject to an emissions price by removing special exemptions for specific economic activities.
All right, and just a quick question, because I would like to get to Professor Leach right after, but are border carbon adjustments an essential piece if we're changing some of the pieces to make them more stringent, as you've said? That was for Professor Winter.
Okay, so there's a border carbon adjustments are one way to address competitiveness concerns. And so that's by leveling the playing field between domestic production of goods and services and the imports from other countries. However, it does not protect the production's exports to other countries. So it doesn't address that aspect of competitiveness.
Thank you. Professor Leach, essentially the same question, which is how do I deal with this challenge of some people saying that oil and gas cap is the only way, and you're saying, in fact, we should rely on existing programs?
I don't think there's a lot of contradiction there. I don't think anyone's saying it's the only way. I think everybody seems to be saying our existing set of policies are not turned to the appropriate level to meet our new goals. And I think that includes the current projections that were in the next to, or the previous budget before this one, that said we were on track to meet our Paris goals, not our Glasgow goals. So I don't think there's a contradiction in anyone saying we need more stringent use of something to meet our policies. I'm just saying this is not what I would choose.
So what would you do to make it more stringent? I have like 40 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do a number of things. You have the carbon pricing regime, which you can apply at the border. You could apply to exports. You could use the clean fuel standard to impose a greater demand on the oil and gas sector, if that's what you want, on sectors of the oil and gas sector. You have all the mechanisms in hand already to drive whatever outcomes you want to see. And of course, the tax code policies that you've already talked about in the previous budget on carbon capture and storage are an option. You have energy policies. So you've got the tools in your toolkit. We don't need to start talking about and developing a new tool.
Great, thank you. So looking at the time, we do have a little bit of committee business that we need to do. We can do it in public after. We're going to need a few minutes. I think we can get through 4 rounds of questions with 5 minutes for each, the Conservatives and the Liberals, and then 2.5 minutes for Monsieur Simard and Mr. Angus, if that's okay, and then we'll probably end at that point. So another 15 minutes for our witnesses if you're good to go. And we'll start right away with Mr. McGuire for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to go back again as well. I mentioned it in previous committees, my enthusiasm for technology in our industry to be able to develop systems through private sectors and universities and colleges to reduce greenhouse gases around the world. And obviously, the 1.8 or 1.6% we have here in Canada, do everything we can to get that to zero as well. Concern from my colleagues as well in regards to just if we did hit zero, that 2% would be very easy to replace by the types of oil that are much more high carbon content than what we have in low carbon content in Canada. And so I just want to ask Mr. Trevitas, and maybe I'll have time for others, in regards to the study that we're doing in that area is on an emissions cap. Some have said they want to see a production cap, but the witnesses that we've had so far have all agreed that this would be an emissions cap, and that's good for the world. So what, I guess just want to see your thoughts in regards to the use of technology around the world, and if we have the expertise, and it's already being done here in Canada, that how that would play out if we could actually export the technology around the world and get that greenhouse gas emissions down. A prime example is the coal industry that some mentioned earlier. We've already got systems in Canada that will scrub it as clean as liquid natural gas, basically, but it's very costly. So can you respond to that firstly? And I know you mentioned the nuclear advantage and everything, but I'd like to have your opinion on that.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I think that Canada is relatively uniquely positioned to, I think, further the development of certain technologies related to carbon reduction, so CCUS being one, also direct capture from the atmosphere being another one, because we do have a pretty active energy industry in this country. So I think that we have the opportunity to develop these technologies. And of course, the technologies wouldn't be limited just to Canada. They could be used anywhere else in the world where somebody wanted to reduce the amount of carbon being out there. So this would be one area where potentially Canada could take a lead role and actually export technology and potentially to the benefit of the Canadian economy.
Do you see, what impact would putting a limit on production have in Canada for sort of the existing oil and gas industry that we have?
Well, as I said in my opening statement, I think that putting a production cap in place it's certainly possible, but it's as I think almost everyone around the table here today has been saying, that's not the goal. The goal is an emissions cap. The production cap is probably sort of the most draconian way of potentially getting there, because it just inherently would reduce the amount of emissions that go with it, but it would also then decrease the benefits of adopting some of these technologies. Obviously, the use of something like carbon capture and storage is that it does allow you to continue to produce a certain amount of energy at the same time as lowering or eliminating emissions.
Thank you. And Ms. Winter, I wonder if you could, if I could get your opinion there as well. I think it's more important, just an opinion on what I'm going to say, whether I'm on the right track or not. It's important that we look at decreasing greenhouse gas emissions around the world. But that has been said that the production could still increase, because by 2050, we need to gauge what the energy needs of the world will be at that time. And as my colleague has said, the greenhouse gas emissions have gone down on our own oil content. But you could still have more production 10 years from now than what we've got today, but still have a smaller amount of emissions around the world. Can you just comment on your thoughts on that?
So, conditional on substantial emissions improvements in oil and gas production, yes, there's absolutely the possibility of increased production and lower total emissions, but it's also conditional on emissions intensity improving by more than production increases.
Well, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to chime in on that as well? I mean, as far as the overall world levels of production or usage in energy in the future? Pardon me?
Ms. Levin has her hand up.
Oh, yes, fine, yes.
And Ms.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as has been said many times, the problem is the embodied carbon within the product. I'd like to disagree with the former witness, Professor Winter. If we increase the production of oil and gas, it increases the amount of emissions in the atmosphere, because even if we lower the even let's say we use carbon capture and storage, and again, there was a question earlier about how much the industry wants. The industry wants $50 billion from the government to pay for carbon capture and storage. And the only thing, that's why 400 of Canada's leading scientists and economists sent a letter to Minister Freeland saying this is a bad use. The tax credit would be a terrible use of public dollars towards locking in a sector which is incompatible with a climate safe future. And to the even using carbon capture and storage, we can only actually tackle between 3 and 9% of the carbons associated with the life cycle of oil and gas. So there's no way we can talk honestly about increasing production if we want a livable future.
Unfortunately, we're more than a minute over on this one, and we need to keep going. I know Mr. Leach and there's another hand I saw. We won't be able to go to you now, but I will move to Ms. Jones, who will have 5 minutes, and either she can pick it up or move on to her own round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all the panelists for their presentations today. It's very interesting, and not unlike several of the meetings we've had as a part of this study, where we've heard support both directly for carbon pricing, others for cap and trade, others with regard to production, some feeling that we need to focus on carbon, not on production. So I think we keep hearing different messages from the different panelists as well. When Mr. Angus was questioning Mr. Marshall earlier, Mr. Marshall indicated that we could not reach the targets that we've set by 2050. I'd like to ask Mr. Keith in particular, because we haven't heard a lot from him so far in this panel, if he shares that perspective, and if he shares the perspective that we need to cap at 2019 levels, but keep reducing until we get below 2005 levels. And if there's any other panelists who would like to respond to that, I'm interested in knowing if you share that view or if you have a different view or a more optimistic view about where we're going and the direction that we're headed in. But I'll certainly start with you, Mr. Keith.
Predicting energy futures is very hard. If you look at the quality of historical projections, they were extremely inaccurate. My personal judgment is the chance of meeting those targets is very low, but I don't actually have a lot of confidence in my own judgment. It's also important to say the targets are fundamentally political. They don't come from some cost-benefit trade-off. They're not actually what scientists say, and I'm one of the scientists. It's also important to say that economists do not actually say that carbon pricing is always the most efficient thing. That is not what careful econs say, because it's only true in a world where technology does not respond to prices. So if you have an economic model in which technology is what we say exogenous, doesn't respond to prices, then just going up from the lowest price to the highest is the right thing. But in the actual world that we live in, which is much more uncertain than the world in those models, it is not necessarily true that carbon pricing is the most effective thing. It may be in some cases and not in others.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if there's anyone else that is really pressed that has an opinion on that or would like to share it. I would like to take one more response if there is one. If not, I'll move on to my other question.
On this topic for me, or?
Yeah, yes.
So on the cap, I would prefer a strong cap for reasons that I said are really reasons of industrial and social policy in Canada to reduce the chance of a crash. And that is, to be clear, a separate policy objective from climate, related but separate. I'll also take the time for a second. I happen to be the founder of the company in Canada that does direct air capture, so I'm pretty involved. And I think there are ways it could be very useful, but I don't see a scenario as our witness from TC Energy does, in which this just is used to compensate for emissions from oil in the future. I think if you think about this under a roughly even carbon pricing scenario, that is not a world that happens.
Okay, I'd like to move on to Ms. Levin on a question. Obviously, as a government, whatever we do here, it's going to have significant impact on workers and families, on economies in various provinces, especially in the prairies right now, is where we're hearing a lot of this. I know it's easy to say we have to get behind the transition. I think we're all behind it. I think as Canadians, the majority of Canadians are very much behind this and want to see real results. However, there's a serious issue here that affects the economy as well, that affects workers and their families. You suggested that, we have to create those opportunities. What are those opportunities? What would you be proposing today to those provinces, those thousands of workers that are going to be impacted? Because that is a responsibility that our government has to look at, as well as the climate piece. And we want to do both, and we want to do both well.
Thanks for the question. And I think it's incredibly important that we make sure that the way we are putting in climate policies brings workers alongside. And we know that investments in the fossil fuel sector have the lowest job creation potential of any sector of the economy. So though that $50 billion to oil and gas would result in so many safer jobs, good paying jobs, if we took that money, invested into the renewable energy sector, into energy efficiency, into the clean growth parts of our economy, which have a future in a carbon constrained world. Whereas, as I said before, oil and gas is on the way out as we see car companies, committing to go fully electric. This is a sector that is the sector of yesterday, and we decide whether we want to equip our communities to succeed in the parts of the economy that actually have a future and bring those workers along, or we're stuck in the past and it's workers who will suffer as a consequence.
Sorry, and we're out of time on this round. We're going to go now to Mr. Simard for his final 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. You keep the best for last, like with Smarties. So, Mr. Lambert-Bertrand, I have a quick question for you. I understand from what you said that you mentioned that the costs and technological constraints will make it difficult to reach our reduction targets, especially for the oil and gas sector. But you also said that that sector should be making the most effort. I just want to tell you that the Minister of the Environment has recently said that he wanted to end subsidies to fossil fuels by 2023. But he's talking about inefficient subsidies, and the devil's in the details. What is an efficient or an inefficient subsidy? It's my impression. I don't want to put words into the Minister of Environment's mouth, but I have the impression that Canada is getting ready to strategically support strategies such as green hydrogen or carbon capture. But there's a primary principle in ecology, and that's the polluter pays principle, or bonus malus. In other words, you have to reward the low carbon footprint behaviors, and you have to disincent people who have a high carbon footprint. So could you tell us about investments that the federal government should make in hydrogen and in carbon capture strategies? Thank you very much for the question. Well, for carbon capture, you have to be careful. Short-term investments could be tempting, but I'd like to refer to some of the previous speakers' words. People were talking about being net zero in 2050. Well, to reach 2050, obviously technology will evolve, but for the time being, that's an astronomical quantity of gas that has to be captured already, unless we stop farming and stop all industry activities. So to begin capturing in all sectors where they decide not to reduce emissions, even if it's difficult in the short term, this is something that would look towards a very complex future for carbon storage. It'll be very impossible to manage. We don't have much experience in this area either. In terms of hydrogen, well, this is highly uncertain. In Canada as elsewhere, there are a lot of companies and countries that are trying to move in a different direction, but others are continuing in this direction. It's tough for the government to make a choice at this time. I think you have to move ahead very cautiously in the short term. It's not an easy solution. Thank you.
Mr. Angus, you get the last 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to invite my colleague and friend, Mr. Levert, to ask questions.
Angus, and thank you, Chair. I think it's important we're having this conversation today on the day on which the UN Secretary General, speaking of the most recent IPCC report, shares his words. He says, "This abdication of leadership is criminal. The world's biggest polluters are guilty of arson of our only home." I'd like to ask of Mr. Marshall and Ms. Levin if she'd like to add. You mentioned calling the industry's bluff on emissions intensity. I think it's important that we do away with myths and stick with facts in this committee. I know you've spoken with this committee before. Can you share the fact of what Canada's emissions intensity is as compared to global peers and how it's risen over recent years?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of different research, academic research papers written about the carbon intensity of different sources of oil. And Canada, last time I was on the committee, I mentioned Ms. Nadia et al. In 2018 that found that Canada's oil was the fourth dirtiest on the planet out of 50 major producing regions. As Dr. Leach, I had hoped he would be able to weigh in when he was contradicted. The emissions intensity of Canadian oil has gotten worse over the last 30 years. And that's because we've moved from conventional oil to more oil sands. And in the oil sands, we've moved from mining oil sands, from oil sands mines to in situ. So Canada's not going to solve the climate change problem by exporting more oil. Our oil is dirty and it's getting worse.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. So let's then work at what we can do together. The reality is that as we dig or as we pursue more oil, it's only going to get dirtier across the country. What we can do is actually invest in people. And I wonder if Ms. Levin, you'd like to close by sharing with us what we can do if we were to avoid the loopholes that are being pushed by oil and gas, what we could do to actually invest in workers now.
I'm going to refer back to my colleague, Mr. Marshall, to jump in there.
I'm going to jump in on that just because I commissioned and helped write a report on just transition that was done by Jim Stanford, a labor economist. And there are a number of ways that you can put into place a just transition strategy for workers and communities. It involves funds for early retirement, funds for training programs for workers, involves relocation funds. For communities, it means community economic development, looking at specific places and seeing what the resources are there in terms of workforce. It means a lot of money, but it's the kind of money that allows communities and workers to be supported as we transition away from fossil fuels, rather than handing over more and more money to the oil and gas industry to solve 20% of their emissions problem.
Thank you.
And we're out of time there. So we do have, as I said, some committee business to go to. But before we do that, thank you to each of the witnesses who has joined us this afternoon. We've had lots of great discussion, lots more to consider as we work on pulling together our report on the oil and gas emissions cap. So thank you. At this point, if you would like to, the witnesses would like to jump off or drop off the call, you're welcome to do that. And if you do have additional thoughts, please send those to us through the clerk. And for the members, both online and in the room, if you could stay with us, we have a brief business to deal with. We need to elect a new vice chair based on the membership of the Conservatives. And so to do that, I need to turn the chair over to the clerk who will oversee that part of the process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So we are going to proceed with the election of first vice chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair. Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chair, Madam Clerk, may I please nominate Larry Maguire?
Okay. It has been moved by Mr. McLean that Mr. Larry Maguire be elected as first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? Okay. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion?
Yes.
I declare the motion carried and Mr. Larry Maguire duly elected first vice chair of the committee. Congratulations.
Great. Welcome, Mr. Maguire. And I understand, Mr. Maguire, you had a question before we adjourned today.
For the committee, Mr. Chair, and I don't think it's very controversial, but with what's going on in the world right now, I just wondered if we could ask the committee for their cooperation in having our natural resource people look up and provide to us a list of all of the natural resources that we either are exporting to Russia or Russia's exporting to us, notwithstanding the discussion we've had earlier. I just think it would be pertinent for us to know then exactly how things shape up in the world in regards to exports with Russia and their involvement with Ukraine right now. And wondered if we could ask the department to do that as a motion from our committee.
Okay, Mr. Angus.
Yeah, I certainly think it's really important for anything that our committee does that we have facts. We're hearing all kinds of contradictory opinions. I would like facts. I work with facts, so I think if we can find that out, find it probably over the last 6, 7, 10 years. I don't, that we have a period of time to look at would be very helpful. And then, if there is, if we know of, are there particular companies that we're dealing with? Maybe we'd want to know that too. So if we can get those facts, and then we can decide what we would do as a committee.
Okay, Mr. Maloney.
I like that suggestion from Mr. McGuire. That information, I think, would be particularly helpful. If we could get a time frame too, perhaps, on what that exchange would look like.
Well, I give it a week. I mean, I don't think it's that, shouldn't be that, if that's a reasonable time frame, by the end of the week or something like that, maybe for our next Monday's meeting.
Mr. McGuire, are you moving an official motion? Because if you are, we'll ask you to put that out, and so that our clerk can officially record it, and then we can put that to the department.
Come up with one.
Okay.
And I would include the Ukraine in that as well, just so we know their situation, Ukraine and Russia, for imports and exports, if that's the will of the committee. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, debate? Otherwise, everybody, all in favor? Oh, Monsieur Simard?
Simplement, j'ai pas d'objection.
I have no objection to looking at the exports to Russia and Ukraine when it comes to oil, but I don't want this to become a subject of debate that turns us away from what we're currently doing, which is the study that we have here in the committee. But I have no objection to obtaining that information. The more information we have, the better we can be.
Colleague, but I'd say the timeline to me is important, because if this information is important, the sooner we act would be better. So I'd say by next Monday, I'd like to have this something that we can carve out time and then discuss whether it's an issue for us or not.
Okay, is everybody good with that? Mr. Bruson?
I think that the 1 week timeline is fair. So I think that I'm good with that. I was just wondering if it could be reread, just what exactly the motion was, but that was perfect. I mean, I'm agreeable.
And Mr. McGuire, do you want to add in the 1 week?
I don't know if we should put in the timeline. I think we want to get it as quickly as possible. I don't know how long it would take the department and the Library of Parliament to put the document together.
I agree with that, Mr. Chair. Just it may be sooner, but I don't want to create a deadline that's artificial, and then somebody says they're not complying, because we all want the information.
So, Mr. McLean.
Mr. Chair, and I would extend it to be the finished goods that are provided with Russian commodities that find their way directly into Canada thereafter, such as oil and gas supplied to West Coast American refineries, where the finished product ends up in Canada.
Okay, Mr. Angus. Well, we'll sort this out.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm dealing with. Like, if the question is about Russian oil and gas exports to Canada, I'm in agreement. If we're going to go further down to ask for all this and the other, I'm not necessarily keen on that, because that's going to take more time. I'm very keen on a hard date. I want to know if we're dealing with the crisis that we're dealing with, and there is reason for us to make a statement on this, then the sooner we know, the better. But I'm not all that keen on adding a whole bunch of other stuff, because then that puts possibly the date back for put more work on. So I think we have a nice, simple message. I'd like to go with that, and I'd like to say we'd like to have it by next Monday, if possible. We understand if the Parliamentary Library can't, but I imagine they can get us that information.
If I could suggest that Mr. McGuire give us his motion, then we'll look at that. If there are any amendments, that we can entertain those at that point. But so, Mr. McGuire, we'll just put it to you.
I move that the committee request that the Natural Resources Department provide our Natural Resources Committee with facts on imports and exports of natural resources from Russia and Ukraine, and from Canada to Russia and Ukraine by our March 7th meeting.
I could add if possible. Or are you looking for from Russia or Russia and Ukraine?
Russia and Ukraine. That's what I said.
Okay.
From Russia and Ukraine, and from Canada to Russia and Ukraine.
That's the motion, Mr. Maloney.
If possible, I can add that at the end of it.
I don't want to get too hung up on this deadline idea, but keep in mind there is no meeting on March 7th, and we're not actually going to be meeting for a few weeks now. So,
word meeting by March 7th.
Mr. Chair?
Okay. Okay, Mr. Angus, Mr. Simard, Mr. Bruson.
Yeah, I guess I thought we were looking at oil and gas because this is what we're studying with the committee. So I'm not sure about all natural resources because I don't know manganese. I mean, there may be a whole bunch of stuff, but that might take more effort. I wanted a nice clean hit here, so I'm not arguing. I don't know what other commodities we trade with in Russia and Ukraine. There may be multiple issues, but certainly oil and gas. That's what's been raised, so that was what I was focused on.
Mr. Simard, Mr. Bruson, Mr. McLean.
Je sais pas si ça a été dit, pardon.
I'm not sure whether this has already been said, but we may need to have some sort of a benchmark or a reference period. If we want to compare, we should know what imports of oil and gas from Russia and Ukraine have been over the last 15 years. If we want to have a picture that's perhaps more useful, I think we should extend it in time. I think a 15-year period could be useful.
I will complicate and simplify at the same time. I agree with the time frame idea. I also, though, agree with Mr. Angus about just keeping it to oil and gas, because if you're trying to get this information within a week, it'll be more complicated if you draw it across anything and everything that counts as a natural resource from Canada. I will, though, suggest that we add one more country to that list, which would be Belarus.
Okay, Mr. McLean, and then we're going to have to sort out official motion and amendments and work through that.
To my colleagues, oil and gas isn't the only resource that is going through the roof right now as far as commodity pricing goes. And there are a number of resources that we need to make sure that we're cognizant of, especially if we're considering any kind of sanctions against Russia. We need to have that fully on our table, both from an import and an export perspective. And I assure my colleagues, these numbers are readily available. All we have to do is ask for them from the Department of External Foreign Affairs. So they will be available very quickly on both a volume basis and a dollars basis. I don't disagree with the period of time, although I think the most relevant period of time is the most recent past. The last year, I think, would probably be the one issue we should look at the most.
So, Mr. McGuire, I'm going to put it to you to, based on the discussion, to give us your final version of the motion, which then we will look at if we're having any amendments put forward. And hopefully we can wind this up quickly so we can then adjourn this meeting and get into the subcommittee meeting.
Yes, I only mentioned natural resources in the bigger picture because I was most interested in looking at what happens in world trade beyond the oil and gas industry here. And my thoughts were including mining and forestry. Those would be the only three that we would look at, because I think they're the major ones. There might be some that my colleagues have mentioned that are trace minerals and those sorts of things, and I'm not sure how impactful that would be for us. I think those three major ones that we deal with in this committee the most would be the ones that I would suggest we look at or ask for that information. And I agree, it is readily available. It could be done by tomorrow if we demanded it, but we're not going to demand it. So that would be why I left that motion pretty much the way I had it. And
so based on that discussion, are we willing to accept the motion as Mr. McGuire has put forward?
Do you want me to define mining, forestry, and oil and gas?
Natural resources is it? So
Mr. Bruson?
Natural resources, yeah. They'll have a list of them anyway, yeah. Okay.
I'd like to suggest the amendment to add Belarus.
Yeah.
So let's take the amendment. Any comments on that? Otherwise, all in favor of Belarus?
Sorry, where did we land on Mr. Simard's suggestion on the 15 years? Because I think
I
that's
hadn't
important.
heard it in.
No, I didn't. I guess I'm not hung up on the number of years. If it's anywhere from 1 year to 10 years, is that fine, Mr. Simard? Or, yeah.
So we'll.
Even 5 would be fine with me, but
let's
it's just
deal with
the
Belarus
most recent
amendment,
pass is what we're
and then
interested
we'll
in.
do the time frame amendment, and then we'll do the motion. So
5 years.
Is everybody fine with adding Belarus? All in favor?
Fine.
Anyone opposed?
And I agree
Okay, we're
with my
good.
colleague from the NDP's
Pardon.
suggestion of 5
Okay,
years.
Je le ferai quand même sur une plus longue période que 5 ans. Je ne pense pas que ça engendre des délais, mais juste aux fins comparatives, peut-être de l'ordre de 2 gouvernements différents, c'est ce qui pourrait être intéressant.
I'm not getting translation.
We didn't get the translation.
Sorry, can it be repeated? Can you hear? 1, 2, 3. Testing. 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 1, 2, 3. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Microphone is on. I said I would do it for longer than 5 years, simply for comparison purposes. Can you hear the interpreting now? Yes?
Ouais.
10 years?
10 years?
So 10 years? 10 years would be okay.
10 years? Everybody good with 10 years?
Yeah.
All in favor? Anyone opposed? Perfect. And now on the amended motion, do you want to give it with
That we request that the Natural Resources Department to provide our Natural Resources Committee with facts on imports and exports of natural resources from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. By March the 7th. For the last 10-year period, by March the 7th.
Okay. Everybody in favor? All in favor? Anyone opposed? We're carried. All right. Thank you, everybody. And with that, we're now adjourned.